by saying that I was the girl. Yes. Let me see if you got it. Yeah, I was the girl you sat next to in English. So like I was there, you knew who I was, but you probably didn't have a very strong opinion about me in either way. So I was invited to all of the parties, but I was like in the background. I played sports, but I wasn't a starter. I was in the gifted program, but I wasn't first in the class. I wasn't one of the brains. So I feel like for the most part, I flew under the radar in high school. And the interesting thing is the one of things I tied into my first three books was obviously I do not look like the Latina stereotype. My dad is from Puerto Rico, my mom is Polish, but my dad is as pale as I am. And so growing up, I did not feel very connected to my last name. So I have this very Rodriguez Puerto Rican last name. And my dad, while Spanish is his first language, he only spoke it with his grandparents, and he made no effort to teach it to us. He came from a different time, a different generation. So I had to seek out those roots as an adult. And, I studied abroad in college. And then when I went to Puerto Rico, when we graduated, when it was the first time anyone in my family, including my dad, had gone back in more than 20 years. They just sort of left it all there. So I sort of had made an effort as I've gotten older, and especially as I've grown into my writing, to embrace my culture and to add more representation into my books for all of the kids out there like me who are probably torn between two different worlds and don't feel like they evenly fit into any stereotype, whether it's in high school or not.
Awesome. And so when you were that kid in English class that people were sitting next to, did you know you wanted to be a writer, or did you want to be something totally else when you grew up?
So I knew I was always good at writing, but I did not think I was good at creative writing. So I have never in my life taken a creative writing class, not in high school, not in college, not even as an adult. Like it just was something I was intimidated by growing up. So I would do really well on essays, and I knew that. So when I got to college, I purposely took courses that were based entirely on essay exams, because if I could write out my essay, I would get an A. If I had to fill in the bubbles, I might not. So I knew that. But then because I was raised blue collar. My parents were raised very poor. So I kind of grew up with the mindset of you had to do something practical. So I'm like, I'm good at writing. I'm going to go into journalism. Like that's very practical. And so I did. I got a broadcast journalism degree, and I worked as a reporter for the first few years out of college in New York. I covered the hotel industry, and I didn't like it. So it was very weird as a type A personality who had a resume full. I had 7 unpaid internships in college in journalism. So I had this huge resume, and then I didn't like it, and I didn't know what to do. And I kept saying to my now husband, like, don't you feel like there's something else you should be doing with your life and you haven't figured it out yet? And he was like, no, I don't feel like that at all. And then I literally had a dream one night that I was a young adult author, and I dreamt an entire series of books that were based on my experience in middle school, just like mean girl bullying stuff. And it was so real. I tell my husband, and he says, don't you remember that psychic? And it turned out like years prior, when I quit my first journalism job to celebrate, we took a vacation around New England, and it was right now. It was like this time of year. It was right after Halloween. And we went to Salem, Massachusetts, and I had never been there before. And I wanted to see a psychic because I had never seen a psychic before. So I'm like, well, if I'm going to do it, like this is the place to do it, Salem on Halloween. So I sit down and I said, I wanted to know about my career. And she said, okay, you're a writer. And I had been like really cagey in the waiting room. I didn't open my purse, my wallet. We didn't speak because I had seen those 2020 specials where they look for like your business card or something. So like she did not have anything to go on at that point. I don't even think she had my name to Google or anything. And this was way back in the early 2000s. So I don't even think she could have Googled me. But yeah, I said, yeah, I'm a writer. And she goes, what do you write about? And I didn't want to tell her because I'm like, she's a psychic. Like, she's supposed to know what I write about. So I just said business. And she said, no, no, I see you writing books, little books, like children's books. And I had completely forgotten about this until I had this dream that I would write young adult novels. And then I decided to write my first book. And that's how it
Wow.
all got kicked off.
That is so cool.
Very bizarre.
That goes so well with the workshop that Kat and I are doing next month. We're doing
Yeah.
an in-person workshop on writing to find your purpose, where we talk about exactly what you were just saying, like that
Mhm.
like all of us are born with a thing. And
Yes.
we kind of know what it is. And when we ignore that, I think the universe, whatever you want to call it, finds a way to keep reminding you. And the reminding is that feeling you described, which is
Mhm.
what you asked your husband. Don't you feel like you should be doing something else? Like,
Yes.
it's
And I
subtle.
think
Yeah. That's
I think that's
amazing.
what kept me going, because in the early years, I had a lot of rejection. I got an agent very quickly within like 2 weeks of querying, which is unheard of, especially back in like 2006, where you were like mailing in envelopes, like a self-addressed stamped envelope. So I
Right.
got an agent very quickly. And I think that kept me in the game. So I got a lot of rejections from publishers. My first book that I published was the third book that I wrote, the third book she attempted to sell for me. So I had 2 books completely die on submission. And what kept me going was I was like, I don't know, I don't get it. I feel like I figured out what I'm supposed to be doing. I wrote these books. I have an agent. I had that validation, but I wasn't selling the books. And I think because I hadn't taken creative writing, I hadn't had that training. It took me several books to get to like where I am now, where I'm comfortable with what I am doing now. And I'm glad that I did get that agent very quickly, because I think I look at authors who are in the querying trenches and who are really going through it. And I don't know if I would have had the grit to stick with it as much as some of these authors who are really sticking with it. I think having that little bit of validation is why I'm still here right now.
Wow. Do you still have the same agent?
Oh God, no. Yeah,
Sometimes
I
it's
mean,
the agent, right? When you're
yeah.
not selling a book. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been in it. So like I've been at this 15 years. So I'm on my 4th agent. Yes. So I've
Okay.
had quite a few. My first agent left agenting. So that was an obvious split. And I don't think it was her in terms of why the book wasn't selling. I just think I probably just needed to become a better writer, maybe, and I know the first book that she picked me up for, which I still love, and I had another agent try to sell. I now know why it didn't sell, and I didn't know that back then. They kept telling me that I was writing a middle grade novel with a young adult voice.
Yeah.
And I don't think I fully understood what that meant back then. And now I do. And now, like, I would have to rewrite that entire book from scratch if I wanted to try to sell it. And so now it's so clear. But at that time, I didn't know what I didn't know. So, but then I've had like 2 more agents since then. And this last one, I think I'm sticking with him. My goodness. I told Elaine, we better be sticking together at this point.
Yeah.
He was the one who sold my last 2 books, Small Town Monsters and Hatchet Girls.
Can you explain what the difference between a middle grade voice and a young adult voice is? Because I've gotten the same feedback too when I tried to write middle grade. I don't think I can write middle grade. It's really hard.
It would be really hard. You have to deconstruct a lot of what, I mean, writing a young adult novel and writing an adult novel is actually not that different. I think if you can do one, you can do the other. There isn't, in terms of stylistically writing, voice, all of that. But middle grade, I have kids who are reading those books. They sound a lot younger. So if you think of like journalism, you're taught to write at an 8th grade level. When you're writing a news article, you're taught to write short sentences, and all of that, I think, applies more to middle school. It has to be a little simpler. The plots have to be simpler. The images have to be simpler. And the language, is, I think, a little more entertaining. It's a little funnier. Even the scary stuff or the serious stuff has a slight, lightness to it if you're really going to hook them in. So I do think you have to like strip it all away and find a whole new writing voice, which you don't really have to do if you're going YA to adult.
I totally agree. I'd heard too that with middle grade, there's a lot less introspection and self-reflection.
Yes.
Like because that age group, they're not really necessarily doing that yet. That was the biggest
No.
thing.
And if you are, it can almost be, because there are adult books that feature young characters, Stephen King's It, so you, just because the character is young doesn't mean that the book is for a younger audience. So they don't have any awareness. I'm raising a middle grade. So like they don't have any self-awareness or introspection of what they did 5 minutes ago, let alone 2 years ago.
That's so true. How old are your kids?
3rd grade and 7th grade.
Okay. Girls or?
My son's in 3rd. He just had his birthday, and my daughter's in 7th.
Okay,
Yes,
and I
I've
have
got
an
a
8th grade
tween
girl.
girl.
So yes, it's a whole different world, isn't it?
Because I told you that first book I wrote was about my bullying experience in 6th grade. So there's no amount of money you could pay me to relive 6th grade. Like that money does not exist. And so then to watch your kid go through it, and I'm like, oh, and when she was going into middle school, and our middle school starts in 6th grade last year. I was like, are you excited to go to middle school? And she was like, no. And I was like, why? And she goes, because every adult I talk to says that middle school is the worst years of their life. It was true. Everyone's like, oh, you're going into middle school. Like, it was awful. Yeah.
And as a parent, I get that a lot too. Like, oh, how old's your kid? 13. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so mean. But yeah, I totally agree. We were talking about that earlier, and I was like, I don't think I could write like that because I don't want to revisit my middle school years. So but you said yours came to you in a dream. So did you just feel like, okay, I better write this down?
It was at a time in my life when I had a lot of time. I can also say that I had just gotten married. We didn't have kids. I was working at a job that, and I just talked about this on TikTok because today's the start of NaNoWriMo, and I made a post about how I have written a book in a month. It wasn't in November. It wasn't part of NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month. But it was at a time in my life when I was in my 20s and it didn't have a lot of responsibilities. So I could write all day. My time was my own. And especially the job that I was working at then, my supervisor had quit and they didn't fill the position yet. So there was like a span of an entire summer where nobody was working. Like it was a nonprofit. It worked with the school district. The school wasn't in session. And I honestly wrote a book every day from 9 to 5 and looked incredibly busy. It's like, that's how I wrote a book in a month. I'm like, I wrote a book in a month because that's what I was doing. And if I had the responsibilities I have right now as a mom, an adult with older parents, all of that, I wouldn't put that pressure on myself to try to achieve this arbitrary deadline, that if you just give yourself a couple more months, you could probably achieve the same end result with a lot less stress.
Yeah. Speaking of TikTok, you're really good at TikTok.
Thank you.
So I want to ask you about your TikTok journey because, and Kat and I were talking about this earlier too, that like in the olden days, because I'm old, like writers were introverts who did not want to be seen or known. Like, and that's kind of why I picked that profession, because that suits my personality. I want everything that I do to be in the book, and the rest of the time, I don't want anyone to know who I am, where I am, what I'm doing. I really don't want to.
Yeah.
But it has changed now. I don't think, I think of like my favorite writer, Dean Koontz. He's almost a misanthrope. He trembles when he gets interviewed. He doesn't ever go on tour. He doesn't want to necessarily be seen out in the world. But it seems like now the writers who are doing really well, you almost have to do it. And I watched you step into that so bravely, and I was like, oh, I'm just gonna watch this because I could never do it. I don't think I could do it. And you've been, I think, quite successful at it. What has that journey been like for you?
I have been on every social media app. I'm on all of them. I think I was on Twitter in 2008 when my first book came out, and I did not have a lot of success on any of those other platforms like I have had on TikTok. I'm not good at being witty in 2 sentences, which is pretty much Twitter. You know, you have to not just have a great thought, but you have to phrase it in a way that is engaging. And I just to date cannot write a good tweet. And so I never really took off there. And Instagram, I didn't know what an author was supposed to do on Instagram, especially before Reels, because Bookstagram is all beautiful aesthetic pictures of books. I'm like, well, I can't take pictures of my own book. That's just weird. And how many selfies can you take of yourself? Like, it's just a feed of just your face. Like, I didn't really know what I was supposed to do on that. So then when Reels came into play, I started making those. And that was on Instagram. And I have a broadcast journalism degree, so I do have some video experience of how to edit, how to add music, do all of that back when it was like a VHS tape and color bars, but I still have like some of the information that is necessary. So I started to get more success with Instagram, you know, when I was doing the Reels, I saw that ticking up. And then my daughter going into middle school, she joined TikTok. She wanted to be on TikTok. And watching her do all of this, she makes those beaded Taylor Swift bracelets, and she has an Etsy page, and she made a TikTok for her bracelets where she's not on camera, but her bracelets are on her wrist. And she was getting like 100,000 views on these little bracelet videos she was making. I was like, my 12-year-old is kicking my butt, like on social media. And so last summer, so a year ago, I decided to do it. I was like, you know, I've got a year before Hatchet Girls comes out. Exactly. My goal was if I start now, maybe I could get to like 5,000 followers by the time the book comes out. And mind you, that's more than what I have on Instagram and Twitter. I think I have like 4,000 on each of those platforms. So I was like, that was my goal. It's like, maybe I could build it up to be, at least that's where I would get to. And I'm almost at 10,000. So I hit, you know, doubled that goal in the year. So that was, you know, exciting, but I think I'm comfortable talking on camera. That it took me probably about half the time, about 6 months. I've been on there a year to figure out what works for me on TikTok. And there are a bunch of different things. People do trends where they do the lip syncing. I suck at those. And I don't think I've ever gotten any good views off of anything where I've tried to do a lip syncing video. Same with like trending songs and stuff like that. I do much dancey type stuff. I did do some of the TikTok dances with my 12-year-old in the beginning, but I don't really do those anymore. And what I found was me just talking to the camera got the most views. So if I got comfortable talking to the camera, talking about writing, publishing, or what was trending on BookTok, what is the conversation everyone is having on BookTok right now? So if it's NaNoWriMo, I'm going to make a post about NaNoWriMo and just talk about what I told you, that, you know, writing a book in a month is kind of an arbitrary goal. And if you've got responsibilities, don't do it. So I can lend that voice to the platform. And that is where I have found the most success. Yeah. So I guess it's fine, but I have author friends who I see who are like crushing it by just doing the trending lip syncs, and that's all they do, and that's where they get like hundreds of thousands of views. So I guess you got to see what your personality is and how like expressive you are. So for me, I guess I'm more expressive verbally, but if someone else is a great actress or an actor with a really expressive face, then they might work better with the trending audios. But yeah, I like it. I actually like TikTok. I don't mind being on there. It doesn't feel as much work as the other platforms always felt for me.
That is fascinating. And I'm sensing a thread through all of this with the writing and with the TikTok, which is, and I think, I don't know if you'd agree with this, but it's kind of what sets writers who make it apart from the writers who don't, which is your willingness to kind of just audit and take a look at everything you're doing and be really dispassionate about it and be like, okay, well, this isn't working, so I'm going to do this instead. And I think a lot of people get hung up. I think of my own mother, who's a fantastic writer, but after 1 or 2 rejections, she just crumbled and never tried again. And do you think that sounds accurate? I mean, that you have this resilience, this practicality, this kind of like, I'm just going to keep trying until it works. I think that's a part of it people don't see, right? That it looks easy, but really you're just trying and trying and trying again. And I think all of us are.
And I think that applies to even not just like the marketing and the social media, but my books themselves.
Right.
I know a lot of authors can feel very precious about their words and their craft and what they, I guess I can step back and look at it from a business angle, so I'll send my agent a bunch of pitches and I don't mind him saying, I think this one will sell and that one won't sell because I just had a client try to sell a book like that and it failed. There might be another author who is going to not accept that feedback, but I'm really passionate about idea A and I'm going to write it anyway. And you can write it anyway. But I guess at this point, I've learned that they're probably right, that if they're saying that's not going to sell, then I take that advice a little easier now because I see it as my job and I see it as a business. And I want to not just write the books, but sell the books. So I have found that, taking that advice has led me to get from my first 6 books were with mid-sized presses, and those were just the books of my heart that I felt like writing. And then I kind of pivoted, and that helped me jump up to the big 5 publishers. And I think now that I'm here, I'm more open to accepting feedback, I guess. I feel like your skin thickens up as you move along in the industry. And in the beginning, like I used to get offended if you told me to change the name of a character. Now there's not a lot that an editor can tell me that it's really going to offend me, that I cannot, if I walk away, really think about and find some way to apply their advice, even if it's not exactly what they wanted me to do, but some way to look like I took their opinion into account and really try to apply it to make them happy. So it's a business like any other.
Yeah. People forget that sometimes.
Yeah.
Speaking of it being a business, do you have a film option deal? Is that correct? Can you tell us?
I do. I have one for Proof of Lies, which is my first thriller book. Nothing's happened with it yet, but there is a producer who has it. And then with Small Town Monsters and Hatchet Girls, I have film agents, different agents, oddly, for both of those. And we've gotten really far into the process where I've had meetings and stuff. But with Hatchet Girls, everything kind of stopped with the strikes. So I don't know what's going to happen when all the strikes finally end and they can go back out in the world and do it again. Same thing with Small Town Monsters. We had gotten really far with a couple of people, but nothing where we actually signed a deal.
Okay.
Hopefully.
Can you tell us what Hatchet Girls is about?
Yes. So Hatchet Girls here, no, I'll hold it up, even though you can see it behind you.
We can see that.
So it was inspired by Lizzie Borden. So if you know the story of like Lizzie Borden took an axe, she was accused of killing her parents in the late 1800s. And I was watching the most recent adaptation of the Lizzie Borden with Kristen Stewart and Chloe Sevigny, and it imagines that Lizzie had an affair with her maid. That was their take on it, and that was why the maid was probably an accessory or an accomplice. And I'm watching the movie and I kind of just had this idea. I'm like, I wonder if there's been another axe murder in Fall River since this happened. And so I start Googling and I couldn't find anything, let alone find another mother and father who have been, murdered by axe since 1892. And I was like, God, what a sensational news story that would turn into if this were to happen today. And especially if it were to happen with a Puerto Rican teenage boy who is accused of this crime in a town that is very white, blue collar, and how big this news event would be. So that was the first germ of an idea. And then I started doing research and I learned that Fall River, Massachusetts, where Lizzie Borden lived, is in this part of New England called the Bridgewater Triangle. And it was turned by this cryptozoologist who studies the paranormal. And it's an area defined in New England that has just a really high amount of documented supernatural activity. So one of the first UFO sightings in the entire world that is documented, written down, happened in this Bridgewater Triangle. The bloodiest war per capita in U.S. history, bloodier than the Civil War, happened in Fall River between the colonists and the Native Americans. They had a satanic panic spree in the 80s with this cult that was supposedly, sacrificing people in the woods, which they probably weren't, but that's a whole other thing. That happened there. And then they have one of the most haunted forests in the world. Like it's listed right under that Japanese forest where people unalive themselves, is the Freetown Fall River Forest. And so all of this stuff was happening where Lizzie Borden's house is located. And right next door to Lizzie Borden, her aunt had lived, and her, prior to the axe murders, which Lizzie was acquitted, which some people don't know, she did get off, but her aunt was unalived herself and her 2 kids in the house right next door. So it kind of led me to this question of, did all these dark things happen because the land is cursed, or is the land cursed because all of these dark things happen? And so that was the theme that kicked off the book. And I try to tie in as much of those legends and lore as possible. And when you get to the end of the book, there's a section called The Truth. And I had it in my last 5 books have this section called The Truth, where I think it ties back to my journalism roots. And I tell the truth of all the stories that I incorporate into the novel and twist around. So you find the truth about Lizzie Borden, and which is, her house is a bed and breakfast, and I did sleep there, and I did hike the forest. So I include all of the truth about the locations that are in the book.
When you start the book, I loved that, by the way. The end was like one of my favorite, your personal stories about going there and all of that.
Yeah.
But do you know what the end is going to be when you start a book like that?
No. So I write really detailed outlines now. That's something I learned with my first thriller when I did Proof of Lies. It was one of the reasons I got a lot of rejections, is I had to learn how to write a thriller, and I had to stop being a pantser and outline, because thrillers require a lot of plot and a lot of details, and you need to know what the bad guy is doing and what his steps are along the plan in order for your main character to find evidence of that plan. So I write really detailed outlines. But with Hatchet Girls, the outline that I sold, so I sold it on proposal, ended up being very different from the finished book in terms of what the exact ending was going to be. So I initially was going to yada yada over the big murder scene because it's YA, and I wasn't sure if I could go that far. And then I got to the scene, and I was like, now I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to go all in. So I went all in with the big murder night scene, and going all in made me change a lot about the whodunit. I made a lot of changes that weren't in the outline because the outline didn't go there. So once I actually went there, I did change a lot of the ending. And the epilogue of the book is in a point of view of a character that has not had a point of view yet. So the book is told in Tessa and Mariella's point of view. And in the outline, the epilogue was supposed to be in one of their points of view. And then when I sat down to write the outline, I just started writing somebody else's point of view. So that ends up being the epilogue. So that was not planned either. But I think that adds a nice little twist to it. And when I got picked up by the film agents, that's one of the things that they liked about it, was the epilogue is a season 2. If it turns into a TV show, epilogue felt like a season 2 for them.
Yeah, it could totally be a sequel. I love it.
Yeah.
Sounds like you do a lot of intuitive writing. It just,
Yeah.
do you find that when you're writing that, you, I don't know, how does it happen that you sit down with an outline and then this other thing happens? What does that feel like?
So I always have some idea of where I'm going, I have this big, when I say my outline's 20 pages, they're pretty detailed. But then when I kind of get there, I'll see it just makes sense. I'll end up in Small Town Monsters, there's these scenes in between, and I call them the interlude chapters. And Small Town Monsters is about The Conjuring and imagining what it would be like to be the daughter of demonologists and evil spreading through town. And she's a bit of a skeptic. And I had these interlude chapters from other points of view of people who live in town, because I wanted to do a possession story where it wasn't just one person being possessed, but almost the entire town was being affected. So I had other townspeople in the interlude chapters and showing how the evil was affecting them. So I'm writing these chapters, and I'm about 75% of the way through the book before I realized what they were. And how I was going to tie it in to the main character in a much larger way. I was like, oh my God, I know what they are now. I was just writing them. And then all of a sudden I gave them a much more meaningful purpose that I hadn't intended when I started the book. So I feel I think that has come with age and with practice and with being on books 7, 8, and 9 that I didn't have in the beginning, and now certain things are intuitive. Like with YA, I try to stick to about 75,000 words. I have this long outline and I'll get to about 75% of the way through the book and I'll realize I'm running out of words. Like I know that intuitively that I don't have enough words left to get to all this plot that I thought was going to happen. And I have to go back and revisit what I was going to do. So certain things, it's usually the 75% way, almost always in the book, where something drastically changes in the book. And that has happened in all of them, even with like Proof of Lies, which is a thriller series. When I got to the last book, I outlined who I thought like the big final confrontation, who it was going to be. And I changed it. When I got to the 75% mark, I was like, no, I'm changing it. That's not right. I'm going to go back and redo it all because now that I've gotten here, I don't like it anymore. And I can see that now in a way I couldn't see with book 1.
You make it sound so easy.
I know.
You do it all.
There's a lot about trust, I think, that you're talking about, like trusting the process, trusting yourself to kind of get there. Do you have any strategies that you use for getting into like the flow or getting ready to write?
I have to write in silence, like complete silence. I used to like be able to, I set a really high word goal, like pre-kids, I would set like a 3,000 words a day goal. Now I can only write when they're at school because then that's the only time I have. So the idea that I had when I was younger, where I could write when the mood struck me, I don't have that anymore. So now I have 9 to 3, and that's when I can write, and that's it. And so it doesn't matter whether I'm in the mood or not. I've got to make myself in the mood. So, and God, I didn't even talk about the pandemic. Like that was a whole other thing. So typically, like I need silence. If I need to get myself psyched up, I will have like a song, and I do like dance in my office to like this one like particular song for each book. It might be different. And that will get me like psyched up and like, okay, now I can sit down and do it. But a lot of times when I'm writing, I'm listening to white noise or brown noise, just to drown out everything and write.
Now I must know what the song for Hatchet Girls was.
So for Hatchet Girls, it wasn't. No, wasn't, because right now I'm listening to You're on Your Own, Kid by Taylor Swift, because that is very writing, You're on Your Own, Kid. That's very apropos. And Small Town Monsters was This Girl Is on Fire by Alicia Keys. And why am I blanking on what the Hatchet Girls song was? I'll have to think about it. Because I'm completely blanking on it. And why am I remembering This Girl's on Fire and not the Hatchet Girls song?
That's okay.
I'll have to think about that one.
No worries.
During the pandemic, it was Eminem's Till I Collapse, because it was like you had to just get it all done till I collapse. Like that was the song. Yeah. So it was a different vibe then.
Did your family, did you have to set rules like, okay, no knocking on the door?
No, my kids were a lot younger. So when the pandemic started, my son was in preschool. And my daughter was in 3rd grade. So that was in March of 2020. So then when they just decided to just end, they just didn't even finish. They just gave them credit for the year and gave them no work. So there really was no school in the spring. And then when the next year started, it was virtual, and my daughter was in 4th and my son was in virtual kindergarten. And so I was in charge of making them sit in front of their computers when they were crying. My daughter was good at it because she's an introvert. So I think she was like, this is fantastic. I wish I could just do this forever. But my son was in virtual kindergarten. He was just crying. He did not want to be there. So I was the parent that was in charge of virtual school because my husband was working at a 9-to-5 job that, pays the bills. So when I sold Small Town Monsters, it was during the pandemic, and I had to the book was written, thankfully. I had written that whole book when I sold it, but I had to do all of my developmental edits, all of my copy edits, all of my proofreads with my kids at home in virtual school. So I would wake up at like 5 o'clock in the morning, and I would work from 5 until 9 a.m. because then at 9 a.m. I had to do virtual school. And then, I was the parent, like doing the cooking and all of that. And then I would lock myself in the guest room for all day Saturday and Sunday. So I figured, like, I had to watch the kids for 5 days. My husband had to then take them Saturday and Sunday. And this was at a time where you really couldn't take them anywhere. So like you could take them out into like a forest somewhere to like hike around, but that was it. And I didn't leave. I did not leave that guest room. Like, I brought my meals in. I had all my snacks in there. Like, I did not leave that room for 2 days in order to get those edits done in time, because it was a really quick turnaround. I think they bought the book in September of 2020, and they wanted to release it in September of 2021, which, if you know publishing, 1 year is actually a quick turnaround for them. So all of my deadlines were very, very tight. And if I didn't meet those deadlines, it wasn't going to release in the Halloween fall season. And if you've got a horror novel, like, you can release it in April, but it's not going to get the same press. It's not going to get listed on like great spooky books to read this season, great Latinx horror novels. It's not going to get any of those lists in April that's going to get in September and October. So I really wanted to hit those deadlines, even if it required that crazy schedule. And I'm so glad I don't have to do that anymore. And I look at my former self, and I honestly don't even know how I did it at that point. It's crazy.
That's amazing. What are you working on right now? Oh, you said you could tell us, but you can't tell us? Or wait, do you have?
I did. I mean, I think I can tell you. I mean, it's going to be announced. I signed the contract. The only reason it hasn't been announced yet is because I had to rewrite my synopsis based on their feedback. And I think we have to like agree on the title. But so I just sent that newly rewritten synopsis. So that's where I've learned like to take feedback. And that's, I think, one of the reasons they did they have picked up my last couple of books on proposal, which I prefer writing on proposal. I know a lot of authors find it incredibly stressful to have to then produce a book in a certain deadline. And if you have anxiety, if that's something that you live with, it can be a very stressful thing to have to produce on a set deadline. For me, I like having the money. So I'm like, I'd rather get paid to write the book than write the book for free and then get paid. So I prefer it this way. So I was able to sell them on synopsis and proposal because I took the feedback, I think, to Small Town Monsters and was able to apply it and wasn't as like offended by it, I guess. Like, and I think it did make the book a lot better, and we've worked together. So it's the same editor. So the next book is going to be in the Philadelphia area. Where I grew up, Delaware County. So if you follow the Pennsylvania election news very intensely, Delaware County is like one of the big election results that they're always waiting for. There were these reform schools that are in there. It's where a lot of the juvenile justice system is. So there was a juvenile detention center. There was a boys reform school called Glen Mills and a girls reform school called Slayton Farms. And Glen Mills was shut down very publicly about 10 years ago because of abusing the boys. And that was made it all over the news. Slayton Farms, the girls' school, both of them are hundreds of years old. The land dates back to William Penn. Like, Slayton Farms was a girls' reform school in the 1800s. Like, it goes that far back. They did also have abuse, but they shut down for financial reasons. So for whatever reason, Glen Mills to this day is still preserved and is absolutely pristine. The lawn is mowed, the lights are on. There's a security guard there. When I tried to drive up recently to walk around, I got stopped pulling into the parking lot and had to tell him I was looking for directions, like on my phone. Like, I had to leave. So they are still preserved. Like, the boys are going to come back at any minute. They are trying to reopen that place. Slayton Farms, however, about like a mile away, is falling apart. It is completely dilapidated. So you have these really old historic buildings that they can't tear down because it's on the historic land. And it is just spray painted all over. It's all broken into, it's all boarded up, and it's super, super creepy. And it's on list in the country as like being one of the best urban explorer places to like walk around in. So I went there by myself in like the middle of the day just to see it and walk around. I didn't go in, like I went in, the doors are already pried off. So I walked into a couple of them, to just the first room to look around. And I thought, this is a great place to set a young adult horror novel. So I'm setting it in the present day when the school is already shut down like it is now, and kids go back there and, you know, chaos ensues. So it's going to tie in a lot of what happened to the girls that were there historically, you know, but more in like interlude type of chapters and ghostly type of things, but then be based on current kids in the area. So it'll be my first one in Philadelphia, in the Philadelphia area, in a while. So I'm glad to write one in my hometown. Yeah.
Wow, when you say hometown, your Philly accent really came out.
I know. That was one of my favorite TikToks. When you talk about TikToks, I had a TikTok go viral because I made a joke that technically Taylor Swift could spend Thanksgiving in Delaware County, in Delco is what we call it, because Travis Kelce's brother, Jason Kelce, plays for the Eagles, and he lives in Delco with his wife. And so I made a joke where I let my Delco accent out. So Delco is where The Mayor of Easttown is set, that show with Kate Winslet where she was a cop, and she had this really crazy accent, and it made it onto Saturday Night Live and stuff. It's our accent. So like what you hear is me having suppressed this accent for like, you know, since I was 18, since I went to college in Boston, and people in Boston thought my accent was weird.
Oh no.
Yeah.
No,
It tells you how bad it is.
It comes out like every now and then I can hear it, but
yeah.
What draws you? You're so like happy as a person, or you seem very happy. What is drawing you to these very dark subjects?
So, and I do get that a lot. And what's interesting is I say that Small Town Monsters is the first book that I wrote that I think I would have read as a teen, because I read the dark stuff. I was 90s. I was a 90s kid. So I read Christopher Pike back then, he did The Midnight Club, which was turned into a Netflix series most recently, but then he was mostly known for like Remember Me and all that stuff. And it was when R.L. Stine was writing Fear Street. So those Fear Street books I loved, and Flowers in the Attic and V.C. Andrews. So that's what I read. So now that I'm writing this, I feel like that's what my teen self would have read. And I do feel like my voice comes out naturally now in the horror vein, because I spend so much time reading that. I think I would struggle to write a romance, like a real like adult romance, because I don't know if I could find it. I think I'm like too much of a Catholic girl to be able to be like, oh my God, my mom's gonna read that. But my parents don't even read my horror novels because they're too Catholic to read the horror novels. So like
you found a happy place.
Yes. But no, I do like the horror stuff, and that's what I read now. Like I read mostly thriller and horror for fun. Those are my fun books, and the movies I like, and I love the spooky stuff. So it's weird. It does seem to, but I find that the horror community as a whole, and the writing community, has been super nice, super friendly, very welcoming. I mean, I know some of you, the young adult sphere has its fair share of drama. I mean, they're lovely people, but we all kind of straddle two worlds. So your young adult romance, or your young adult fantasy, or young adult whatever. So every young adult author kind of is in the young adult world and whatever their other genre is. And I feel like the horror genre is like really nice people, really nice, cool people who are writing spooky books. They're not scary. I don't know. They're not what you think they are, I guess.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
It's interesting. That's fascinating, I think. Who was an author? Well, first of all, who was an early influence for you as an author, and who's a recent one? And are there any authors you've met where you've just been like excited and kind of starstruck?
Let's see. In terms of my own writing, so I told you the books I read as a kid. So I'll always give props to like the OGs of YA from Judy Blume on. I think the first young adult book that I read where I was like, wow, I want to be a better writer, I want to be this good, was Suzanne Collins' The Hunger Games. I can visualize myself. I was on vacation reading that book and thinking like, wow, like I want to write something this good. That book just blew me away with its creativity and everything. I mean, she changed the game, I think, with that book. And that had a huge influence on me, more than some of the other huge juggernauts of that time, you know, like the Twilight or the Harry Potter. I think Hunger Games, which is darker. So I guess that kind of is in line with that pivot that I eventually took. Starstruck. So when I was when I wrote Proof of Lies, which is my first young adult thriller, so it was 2018, and it's like a spy thriller, and it got nominated for the International Thriller Awards. So I got to go to the ceremony in New York, and it was happened to be the year where I am telling you, like, all the stars were there. So before, I will tell you, I was asked in advance, does anyone want to volunteer while you're at the conference? I was going by myself. I knew no other thriller writers who were going to be there. So my husband was coming up to go with me to the award ceremony, but the actual 3 days of conferences, I was flying completely solo. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to volunteer. It'll be a way for me to meet people. So they asked, what I decided to volunteer for is to be the person that holds up the card that says 10 minutes left in the panel. And I was like, that's easy, right? That's super easy. So they give a list of panels, and I randomly picked one that was called Jack the Ripper, because look at Hatchet Girls, I love historical murders. I'm like, this sounds great. It didn't say who was going to be in the panels. So I get there the day of the panels. It's the first day I'm there. It's literally the first panel I'm going to be going to. And I'm type A, so I get there early. I'm taking this very seriously. They give me my card, and they're like, okay, just make sure you sit up front. I'm like, okay. The panelists were George R.R. Martin, who wrote Game of Thrones, R.L. Stine, who wrote The Fear Street in Goosebumps, Lee Child, who wrote Jack Reacher, you know, that whole TV show, the guy who wrote Rambo, which honestly I didn't even know was a book. It was all of the famous men, because like I said, there was a lot of men in the thriller world. Yes. All of the famous men were on this one panel. Okay. And I was like, and so I'm like, okay, I sit down. I'm the first person at this event. I sit dead center in the front row. And this was not like an auditorium. This is like a hotel room, like banquet room. So the panelists are at the table, just like a few feet in front of me. And they sit down, and I don't know why everyone comes in to take their seats, you know, in the audience. No one else sits in my row. I am in this row completely by myself in this whole row, and I'm a woman, and it's mostly men, and here's just me in a dress, and there's all these men sitting staring at me. And when you're on a panel, you have to make eye contact with the crowd, and because I'm sticking out like a sore thumb, they're all making very intense eye contact with me the entire hour that they're speaking. And it's like I'm just like staring at like George R.R. Martin and trying to like not blink, trying to like fix my face and like look really interested. And then like my moment comes, I like hold up my card, and I felt like that girl in the boxing ring, you know, like in the bikini who walks around. Like I felt so exposed. I go to panels after this, and the person who had my job like sort of just like stood on the side, like in like near the doors. And we're like, you barely even saw them. And then there was me. But because of that, like they have like a cocktail hour later, and everybody wanted to meet George R.R. Martin. I mean, it was right when it was 2018. So I don't think the show was done yet. I think it was still going on. I think it was going into its last season. And he had brought all of these assistants. He calls them his minions. And they were all kind of around him. Like there was no one stopping you from going up to him. But there was definitely like a feeling of intimidation because you had to go to a table where he was sitting. So my husband and I were like, we're going to do this. We're going to work up the nerve. And we finally make our way over there. And I walk up, I say hi, and he recognized me instantly. And he goes, he read my name badge, and he goes, you were nominated, right? And I said, yeah, I was. And I guess after the event, he must have asked, like, who was that girl who was sitting in the front row? Like, what was she doing here? So he knew exactly who I was and why I was there. So that was my most starstruck, embarrassing, like author moment of when I met all of the most famous thriller writers like in the world right now.
At the same time. That's awesome.
At the same time, yes. And I was the only person who was like so starstruck by R.L. Stine and ran up to him afterwards to get him to sign my Goosebumps book, because like everyone else was like Lee Child and like George R.R. Martin. I was like, R.L. Stine, can you like sign my Goosebumps? Yeah.
You're so humble too, because you're at that conference and you're nominated for an award, and yet you're starstruck by all these other people too.
Oh, absolutely. I was totally I was even starstruck by the other young adult authors, because there were some big ones there, like E. Lockhart, who wrote like We Were Liars. There were some really big names there that I was even too starstruck to talk to them. So like, yeah, it's cocktail parties are my kryptonite. Like, I'm not an introvert. I'm okay at like a panel or a dinner if I'm seated, you know, and you give me a table, I can talk to the people. But a cocktail party or like any sort of mingling, that gives me so much anxiety when you're all, unless I have a buddy that I can like kind of cling on to for the day.
Same.
Yeah.
Okay. I had to attend a workshop once when I used to be a journalist too. And they sent me to some etiquette workshop where they actually teach you how to be at a cocktail party. Like there are things, there are rules I didn't know. I didn't know the
Yeah.
rules. Like when you have a name tag, because I'm right-handed, you always put it here, right?
Yeah.
Like, no, you put it here. You always put your name tag on the right if you're right-handed, because when you shake hands, people look up your arm. Name tag. And that you don't talk to the same person for more than 5 minutes.
Yeah. I was so, and when I was a reporter, so I covered hotels and they would send me to all these hotel conferences. And that was even worse because I was in my early 20s and it was all men, all old men who owned hotel companies or ran hotel companies. So it's like a room, we're talking Vegas, like a conference in Vegas. So like hundreds, thousands of men, and there's like 22-year-old me in there with a last name. My maiden name is Rodriguez, and I had like the rudest comments of like, "How'd you get that name? Like, would you marry a Latino?" Like, just like, "Yeah, it's great. I feel so comfortable here. Yeah, thanks for inviting me." I hated those men. Yeah.
Did you get your vaccines today?
Yeah.
I'm looking at there. I see your.
I got them like 2 hours before this. Like, I was going to wear long sleeves, but when I do like talking events, I don't know, like I feel like I sweat and I get like, you know, so I need sleeveless.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad you're promoting that.
Yes.
Okay, we have like the weird questions, and then if anybody else has questions, you can put them in the chat, you guys. Are you guys able to access the chat? I was doing weird stuff with the settings earlier. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Should we ask some of our weird questions? Okay, I'm going to ask one of the weird.
That's a weird question.
Okay, what's your favorite fast food chain and why?
Fast food chain. I'm probably boring. Like, I like Panera. I like the salads and the sandwiches, like or Starbucks, to be honest, which I know like everyone's like thinks Starbucks is evil, but I like Starbucks. I'm going to drink their Starbucks. If I go to an airport, it's exactly where I'm going. So that would probably be my favorite.
That was both of ours too.
Yeah, that was funny when we were putting up. We met earlier today, put together our questions. We're like, does Starbucks count?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we're all evil Starbucks. Okay, here's another one. Who was your first celebrity crush?
Oh, Ralph Macchio in Karate Kid. He was probably the same height as me when I was in elementary school, so it would have worked.
He was my first one, and then when I saw him again in the most recent, series, I still my celebrity crush. Okay, Renette Ramirez has asked you a question in the chat. Which book of yours is your favorite?
Which is my favorite? So I will always be emotionally attached to this character, Anastasia Phoenix, in Proof of Lies, mostly because it took me 7 years to get this book published. I had 3 different agents pick up this book and think that they could sell it. So I say I have 4 agents. The first 3 all tried to sell this book. And a couple of them really tried to revise it, and it went through massive, massive changes by the end of it. But I just loved that story, and I wouldn't give up on it. And it was also at a time when I had both my kids. So that's why it took so much longer to like revise these books and get it where I wanted to be. But when I finally got that published, like I felt like I had accomplished something. I mean, talk about persistence. My background on my laptop, the wallpaper was a fortune cookie I got that said nothing in the world could take the place of persistence. And that was my background for the longest time while I was trying to get that book published. So I think I will always have a soft spot for Anastasia.
Okay, that you just blew my mind. That's more persistence than I think I've ever No, that's amazing. Most
It
people give up. So what is it that drives you? Where does this confidence come from? And how can we get some of it?
Right.
That book, I felt like that book, I had touched on an idea that I really thought was a good idea. And I was coming off of having written just contemporary romances where I wrote by the seat of my pants. And then I had this idea for a thriller. And it was, I love spy thrillers. So I loved Alias, all of those like girl-centric spy thrillers, those were my favorite. And I wanted to do something like that, and that was international. And I had this idea of what if the spy organization, instead of being a government group, was a private group, more like the mafia, that you could work for hire, and their specialty was disinformation. So this was pre-Trump, pre-fake news, the idea that you would hire this group to manipulate the press to make them think that X happened when really Y had happened. So I took all of these conspiracy theories in history, starting with, that's why the first book is in Italy. In the late 1970s, their prime minister, Aldo Moro, was assassinated and his body was found in the trunk of a car. So it's their JFK assassination. And there are all these conspiracies over what happened and who actually did it. So I took some of those conspiracies and I put my character's parents in there as being the spy organization that manipulated the press to come up with the story that everyone believes today. And that was based off of a professor I had. So I went to Boston University. And one of the reasons I went there was when I was a high school student, and I went to that intro thing of you can learn about the school. There was a guy there from the College of Communication in the journalism program who was talking about this professor he had, who used to be the deputy director of disinformation for the Czech Republic during the Cold War. So he was a communist spy who specialized in making the world think that the Nazis still existed and were up to no good. So everyone would be looking for the Nazis and not paying attention to what the communists were doing. And he planted all of these fake stuff, like not just fake news stories, but literally dumped like a treasure trove of Nazi paraphernalia, like in a lake for journalists to find and stuff. So then he ends up teaching at BU, because basically Russia came in, they were going to kill him, he was going to be executed. He somehow got to flee to America and was teaching journalism at Boston University to teach kids how to tell when they were being fed the exact type of false information that he did for a living. So I was like, the coolest thing. So I end up going to BU and the guy retires and I never got to take his class. So when I had this idea for the book, I sought him out. He was still alive at this point. He was living in Massachusetts and he was painting watercolors. He was the most interesting man in the world. Like, that Dos Equis commercial, that was this guy. He was the most interesting man in the world. So I met with him at his house and he did this whole interview. And so when I wrote this book, I was like, this is the best idea I'm ever going to have. I'm never going to have another good idea. I was convinced, like, if I can't sell this book, then I can't sell anything. And so I just kept working on it and working on it. And by the end, the draft that is published, a character who initially died in chapter 2 now like makes it through. So like, that's how dramatically the book ended up changing for me and how much I needed to learn about how to write a thriller. It was really my masterclass, was those 7 years of me teaching myself how to be a better writer. And so now I can write these books and see the feedback and take it a lot easier, because I'd rather get it from my editor than spend 7 years getting rejections and to finally get to that end result anyway.
What an amazing answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. We've got a couple more questions from people. So Ketty Esquivel asks, do you recommend books being finished before finding an agent to sell them?
Yes. So you pretty much have to for novels. I think nonfiction is the only genre where you can sell on proposal based on your platform. So if you are an academic with, like, my brother-in-law is an ethnomusicologist with a specialty in heavy metal music, he can pitch on proposal. That's a really specific specialty, but for those of us, if you're writing novels or memoir, you have to write the entire book and it has to be perfected down to an inch of its life. So by the time you are querying it, you should be sick of it. Like you can't even look at it anymore. Like you're like, if I even look at this book one more time, it should almost be memorized. Like you get to that point where it's not even going to be useful for you to read through it one more time because you've almost got it memorized and you can't even see it anymore. So you need some distance. And that's when you're ready to query, in my opinion, because the agents that are going to look at it. So I've had 4 agents. Of those 4, 2 of them I would call editorial agents and 2 are not. So my current agent is not an editorial agent. He's a sales guy. He's the one who got me leveled up from mid-list to the big 5. And that's what he gets passionate about, is selling it, the Hollywood rights and having all of these other connections, but editorial is not his jam. So if you might end up getting an editorial agent who's going to work with you on the book for 7 months, but you may not. And if you have somebody looking at it who's not editorial, then they are going to say no. If they see your book and if they see that there are issues with it, they may just say no rather than work with you on those 7 months. So it depends on the agent, how much work they're going to do. And you may end up, I know people I did to get Proof of Lies sold with my 3rd agent. I did do several months of revision with her. She was an editorial agent and she really did help whip it into shape, but not every agent's going to do that. So the more you can do on the front end is going to increase your chances of getting a yes.
And just to clarify, this is for like a first book, right? Because you're able now, you have enough success with all of the books that you have, that you're able as a novelist to sell books just on proposal, but you couldn't maybe have done that at the beginning. Is that right?
No. So Hatchet Girls is my 7th novel. Is it 6th? 8th novel. And it's the first book that I sold on proposal. So, and that was because I was selling it to the exact same editor, the exact same publisher. So I could use that relationship because I went through so much rejection with Proof of Lies. I like the stability. So I like going back to the same editor and and that's why my next 2 books are going to be with the same editor. I like that, but I could, other authors and agents may want to go widely to get more money. I liked where I was, so I'm going to stick with it. So if I can sell on proposal, I'm going to do that.
All right. Renette asks, says, I love horror. What frightens or scares you?
Oh, possession. So that's why my first book, Small Town Monsters, is a possession story. So the horror genre has been dominated by white men and they have been writing what scares them. And I think what scares women is very different than what scares men. And not too many women I know are actually scared of a guy jumping out of the bushes with a machete. Like that's not going to happen. We're scared of the guy at the bus stop or the guy that lives next door or the guy that works in our office. Like we're scared of different things. And for me, possession, having grown up Catholic, I was raised to believe in evil and all of that. So The Exorcist is still my scariest movie of all time. And I wanted to toy around with the idea of what if possession wasn't just affecting one person, but affecting an entire town. And that's another thing that I think sort of taps into what scares women, because it even comes into Hatchet Girls. One of the main characters, Mariella, is being affected by evil that's in her town, and she's hearing whispers. And I think for women, losing control over your own body is the scariest thing that can happen. And that is why I think possession will always get me more than any other type of horror. And so I've kind of used that in both of my last 2 horror novels, and I'll probably use it in the next one in some sort of way, whether it's not like demonic possession in Hatchet Girls in the same way. And in the next book, it's not, it's more ghostly, but the idea of not having control over your own body, I think is the scariest thing as a woman. And I think that's adding a lot to the genre. There's so many more women in horror now. There's so many more people of color in horror. And I think that's why the genre is booming so much. It's huge right now because you're finally getting new voices and readers are responding to that they're getting a whole new genre. It feels like people who have read horror over and over and over again for decades are reading all of our books because it feels fresh and new in a genre that they love because they're finally getting new voices and new perspectives on it. And I hope that continues.
Love that. I do too. Melissa Gonzalez asks, what is something you wish you could tell your younger self when it comes to writing or becoming an author?
Oh. So my younger self, like I said, I was very intimidated by creative writing. And it's interesting, my high school alma mater invited me back to speak at a writing competition that was for all of Delaware County. And it was kids who were selected to be in this writing competition. And it just so happened that they were holding it that year at my high school, at my alma mater. So they wanted me to come back and talk to the kids while the judges were judging their work. The kids go in, they're given a prompt they have to write that day, and the judges judge their work. And I was talking to them. And I said to one of the teachers there, who had been a teacher when I was there, I said, oh, this is a really cool competition. I guess it didn't exist when I was a student. She goes, no, it did. I was like, oh, it did. And I was like, how did these kids end up here? They had to be recommended by their teacher to be put in there. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So like, no one recommended me. So like the person from like the class of 400 and some kids that actually goes on to write books, nobody saw that I was actually going to go on to be a writer. So if I was going to talk to my younger self, I think she would be surprised to know that I am a writer now, and that is what I'm doing for a living. And I didn't have a lot of self-confidence as a kid. I don't think I found self-confidence until I got to college and was able to like be somewhere else and, be my own person. So I would just love to see that girl have a little more confidence that I eventually grew to have when I got older.
Love that. Kenny has a follow-up question for you. It says that you've mentioned pitching in September and October. Did she understand that right? And so finish the book first and then go to an agent in September, October.
So you have to finish your entire book, write it to the very, very end. And then when you're trying to find an agent, the process is called querying. And there's a really great website, I think it's called Agent Tracker, Query Tracker. If someone knows it in the comments, I think it's querytracker.net maybe. And that is actually not just, it lists all the literary agents and every genre they represent, but it also goes through the steps of querying, and there are really good message boards, and you can post your query letter. And so when I started out, there was an older forum called like writers.net or something like that. And that is where I learned how to write a query letter. Like I went on these forums, I started reading how to write. It's a very specific letter, very similar to a cover letter if you're applying for a job, where you do a paragraph about yourself, 2 paragraphs about your book, similar to the back of cover of a book, and then why you're querying this particular agent. And it's very specific, and that's all you get. And usually I think you can paste your first 5 pages. And that's all you get to send them. And then you get to wait and hear if they're going to request a partial manuscript or a full manuscript. And then you wait and wait and wait and wait and wait until you hear a response of whether they're going to take you on or reject you. And you can do that at any month of the year. So if your book is finished right now and it's November 1st and you've got an absolutely polished manuscript, I'd recommend getting a couple friends to read it or critique partners to read it, and you're ready to query. You can query in any month. The only time I wouldn't recommend querying is between Thanksgiving and New Year's. The industry is utterly dead. So stop the week before Thanksgiving and restart January 7th. The summertime can be slow, and you'll see agents that are closed to querying, but that doesn't mean you can't query then. I have queried in the summer before. So newer agents, younger agents will be looking for clients in the summer. It's just the really big name top dog agents are going to close to submissions certain parts of the year. And it will say that on Query Tracker, that this agent, if you click on their name, is closed to submissions and will reopen January 7th. And you just got to follow their guidelines when you're submitting. So a lot of them you submit directly through this program, through Query Tracker. It's a form, and you just fill in the boxes and you hit submit and just wait it out. And you'll see people so my agent is Lane Haymont. If you look up his name, there'll probably be people in the messages under his name who will say, queried on November 1st, got a form rejection, you know what I mean? Like within 2 hours, it'll tell you how quickly they responded and what the rejection was, or got a partial request on 1 month later. And you can read some of those responses to get a sense of what you're getting into. Yeah.
How do you know when your agent is not right for you? Because you probably know writers like this too. I know writers who are very attached to their agent as a friend, and that agent might not be doing anything for their career, or might actually be hurting them. How do you, because you've switched 4 times.
Yeah.
What brings you to that point where you realize that it's time to move on, and how do you do that gracefully?
So I struggled with the being friends with my agent thing for really my first 3 agents. That's exactly what my issue was. So I stayed with my first agent a lot longer than I should have. I should have left. She was with a big agency in New York when she signed me and when she sold my first book. And then she broke off on her own. And she wasn't ready, I don't think, to do that. We all went with her. And it got to the point where she wouldn't respond to any communication. You would send her an email and you wouldn't get a response for months. And there was we had a support group online of her clients. Have you heard from her? Have you heard from her? I haven't heard from her. And a lot of the clients thought I had the most communication because she had sold a book for me, but I was on submission for months and she wasn't responding to any of my messages. So I stayed way longer because I was so scared to go back to the query process. I was like, what if I never get picked up again? I can't do this again. And I was so scared. And I definitely stalled my career a little bit by staying too long. And then I signed this was the thing. I became really good friends with that first agent. I talked more about her divorce than my career. So I thought that as a woman, I was very young. I was younger than 30 when I signed with her. So I thought that's how you get ahead, right? You become friends with somebody and then they can't drop you, right? They'll feel too bad to drop me because they'll like me so much. And it did have her stick with me through 2 books that died on submission. But then it did make me feel very loyal to her, that if I left her too, I was really screwing her when all of her clients were now ditching her. And I felt bad for her when I wasn't thinking about myself. And then my next 2 agents were very similar. They also both females, also became good friends with them. The second agent didn't sell anything for me. And that was a pretty amicable split after she kind of tried and failed. But the third agent was heartbreaking. That was my hardest one. And I had written an entire young adult novel. So we didn't have any conversations about my career, about what I should write next. What does Diana Rodriguez Wallach, what is her brand? What do you want to be known for? None of that. So when I finished the Proof of Lies series, which was thrillers, I decided to write another contemporary romance. And she didn't stop me. I didn't share any of my ideas. I didn't share a synopsis with her, an outline, nothing. I wrote the entire book, gave it to her, and she didn't like it, at all, at all. So then this is now really tense because I had just wasted 6 months writing a book that she was just like, no. So I'm like, well, what do I do now? Am I going to go find another agent? So then I start writing another book, which ends up becoming Small Town Monsters. I sent her the first 30 pages and she didn't like those either. And that's when we parted ways. And that was heartbreaking because I did think she was going to be my agent forever. I just didn't see it coming. So when I had to go out and query again, for the 4th time, God, am I really going to do this again? I finished writing Small Town Monsters, I say, out of spite. I wrote that book out of pure spite. I wanted to prove her wrong. I prove that this was a good idea, that I could do this. And I wrote that book very quickly, I think in about 3 months. And when I went out to query, at that time, it was 2019. I did just regular query through Query Tracker. I did that. And then there was also a Twitter contest at that time called Pitch Madness. I don't think it exists anymore, but it was just I logged on one day and it was happening. I saw that all these tweets going up where people were pitching their books. And I just decided, the spur of the moment, to throw my tweet up there. I only got 4 likes. So in these contests, if an agent likes your tweet, then you can send them the full query. So I only got 4 likes. Of those 4, all of them ended up requesting the full manuscript, and a couple of them made offers off of that. And so this was the first time I had a chance to choose between different agents. And the first agent I spoke to, she was Puerto Rican. She lived in Ithaca. My husband went to Cornell. She had kids the same age as my kids. I literally spoke to her for like almost 2 hours about life. I could have gone out and got coffee with her on Saturday. She would have been my best friend. And then I get on the call with Lane. I had never worked with a guy in publishing. You know, young adult is very female centric. And so the conversation was like 20 minutes. It was all business. And he sold me on himself. He's like, I know where I'm going to pitch this. We have for the film rights. I know this film agent. We're going to sign with him. He's going to love this. I know this producer who's going to be so into, and it was all of this stuff that was so beyond just trying to sell the book that I like sat down and looked at this and I was like, it is time for me to stop doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And I was like, I'm going to pick the guy who is all business. To this day, I don't think he knows my kids' names. Like he is all business, and it is amazing. It is amazing. And those connections sold the book because it was a pandemic. So we pitched that book in January 2020. March, the pandemic happens. I don't think we had gotten a single response back yet from editors when it went out on submission. And the way he ended up selling it was he then sent it to a film agent who loved it and wanted to pick it up. And she said, well, I can't submit it around Hollywood until she has a book deal. Well, it had been crickets, like nothing. We're hearing nothing. Like 6 months have gone by. So this film agent goes out anyway and pitches it to a really big Hollywood horror producer who had made a lot of big movies. And the guy was interested, and he wrote an email after reading the book about how much he liked it. And my literary agent took that producer's email and sent it to all of the editors who had been sitting on it. And that's how we got an offer. The offer from like Wendy Loja who's like the head of like Brandon House Children. She had it for 7 months. She had been sitting on it for 7 months, and it was that email. So it was like, absolutely, if he was not my agent, if he hadn't done these things that typically, and you know, one of my past agents would never have done, I don't think the book would have sold. I don't think it would have. So that made a huge difference. And it was knowing it was time to not be friends with my agent, like, and to make this a business relationship and go for who's going to get me to the next level. And he did.
Yeah. That is fascinating. I think that's fascinating because there are many different kinds of agents.
Yeah.
And those all business ones are pretty great.
Yeah. But with Proof of Lies, that third agent, I needed an editorial agent, and it was her editorial notes that got the book sold. So at that stage in my career, when I was younger, that is what I needed, but that's not what I need right now. So I have brought a couple of author friends over to my current agent who are my age, who have been at this for a really long time and who were burnt out and who were going to leave publishing. And he did the same thing. He got them, you know, the deals that they were looking for at a time when they were ready to give up. But I don't necessarily, I guess he could represent, he might represent newbie authors. It would just be, as a newbie author, I'd imagine be a very different way to start out in this business than with an agent who was like holding the hand all the way through for the first time.
Yeah. And there are agents who are both, like there are editorial and really good at sales. And then there are editorial ones whose advice is maybe not great. Like, I learned that the hard way too. Like, the older you get, the more you know what your strengths are and how to. I think what's really important, I think, especially for Latinas, is learning to say no, and also learning to insist, yes, I actually do know what I want. I actually do know that this is the right thing to do. I've had trouble with that too.
Yeah. That was the second agent when she was trying to sell Proof of Lies. So it's a thriller, it's a spy thriller. In the first like 100 pages or so, she's in Boston, just trying, you know, in that transition period of normal girl learning, like being embroiled in chaos. And then it goes into all the fun stuff, running around to Italy. She was the only person who read that book and liked the first 100 pages and not the running around to Italy part. And every other person who read it, every editor, and I had so many rejections from editors, were all about how you need to fix these first 100 pages to get you to Italy in a different way. It was the first 100 pages that were not working to get her into the fun stuff. And she was the agent who had the exact opposite impression. And that's when I was like, okay, she doesn't get it. Like, I knew she didn't get it, and this wasn't going to work. And we were just going to spin our wheels on this. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to see 1 second here. Oh, this is kind of, do your kids read your books?
So my daughter is 12 and she read Small Town Monsters, but she liked it. She loves horror movies, but she likes to read YA romances. So like, I do not hold a candle to Jenny Han. So like, she read it,
Right,
it's her mom's book. And all of her friends were like, well, haven't you read it? But I don't know if she'll read Hatchet Girls. I think she prefers the teen romances at this stage right now. So, but the other books, it was funny. It was the first book that I had wrote, because I made the joke in all of my acknowledgments to thank my kids, but they're too young to read this book. And I can't say that anymore because now I've got a kid who can read this book. So it's come full circle in my, mothering and writing journey.
Have you noticed a difference at all in the industry since you started, in how publishing handles marginalized voices or writers at all? Has it gotten easier? Has it gotten harder? What do you think?
So I've had an interesting experience where my first 3 books are based on my ethnic identity. The main character is Polish and Puerto Rican, who doesn't look like the stereotype and is growing up in the Philly suburbs, disconnected from her background, and then goes to Puerto Rico and kind of discovers, her family and her roots. And it was very much like a nom de plume. It was based on some actual events that happened in my life. And after that, I realized that I then got put not just in like a YA box, but the YA Latina box. So there was an expectation that I was going to continue writing these cultural stories. And when I wrote a spy thriller, I think I got a lot of rejections that said, I'm surprised the character isn't Puerto Rican, because she wasn't in those books. I felt like Amour and Summer Secrets was my homage to my dad's side. And so the next one, I kind of leaned into the European side. My mom's side is Polish. So like, oh, I'll do books. And the last book takes place in Poland. So I wanted to kind of lean into that side. And I didn't realize how jarring that would be to the publishing industry if I did not write another Latina book. And I believe that is one of the reasons that the book struggled so much, is that they had expected me to continue in that box. And so for a long time, I rejected that and I struggled with it. But then when Proof of Lies came out, it was received by the Latino community just as much enthusiasm as the first 3 books were, even though it didn't have a Puerto Rican character in it. They just cared that I was Puerto Rican and I wrote the book, and it was in all of the, the Philadelphia has a Spanish language newspaper. It was in all of the stuff, in all of the websites. And I realized that with my next books, I intentionally now do write Puerto Rican characters, because what that showed me was how much this community needs more Puerto Rican authors and Puerto Rican characters, and they want these stories told, and we will lift you up because we need more of you out there. And then I look at these statistics where it's like, I think 6% of children's books are actually written by, Latinx authors. So it's a really small, tiny little nugget. And even the ones that feature Latinx characters are like, this percentage of those that are actually written by persons of color are even smaller. Like, it's a small slice of the pie. So I've kind of leaned in really hard and embraced that now, hopefully to create more opportunities for other authors, you know, coming up behind me to make it a little easier than it was in 2008 when my first book came out, and it was a novelty. They came out before Own Voices, before that was a thing. And so now, like, that helped to open the door a little bit, but I've sort of come really far in my arc in learning about this industry and seeing where I can fit in and where I can do the most good as a writer and to readers.
That's really interesting, because in a way it's not so much being pigeonholed as it is realizing that there's a real need.
Yes. Yes, that's exactly what it was. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember seeing there was an NFL player, I'm forgetting his name, but he had a Spanish surname, but he wasn't Latino. He was something else. I think maybe he might have been Filipino or something.
Yeah.
But people were always coming up to him and saying, "Oh, I'm so glad that there's a Latino in the NFL. It's really important to me to feel represented." And he would correct people for a long time. And then he stopped because he realized it wasn't about him. It was about people feeling seen. And so he started to just, instead of correcting them, he started to just graciously say, "Thank you."
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. I kind of feel that too. Like, on the one hand, you want to be free to write about whatever you want. You don't want people saying you have to write about this, because something like, you know, like Dean Koontz or T.C. Boyle, they're never told you can only write about people who look like you. They write about everybody, and nobody's ever like, "Well, do you really have the pedigree to write about everybody?"
Yeah.
You know, why shouldn't we also be able to write about everybody?
Yeah.
But at the same
And I think the genre needed to change. I felt like in the beginning, it was very much trauma porn. Like, if there was a story by a BIPOC author, there was an expectation that it was going to be about your ethnic identity, which was what my first 3 books were about. Or it's going to be about struggle or immigration or something traumatic. And to now just be able to write horror novels where the main character is Puerto Rican, but that doesn't necessarily mean, you know what I mean? It's not about, like, that's not defining the story. It's their identity. Like, even though Hatchet Girls, it does a little bit, because how a Puerto Rican boy would be treated if he was accused of a crime is very different than a white girl. And I do put that in there. But I think you just need to see more persons of color in thrillers and in horror novels and in romances, where their identity isn't this big traumatic thing. Their family isn't this big traumatic thing.
Yeah, I think that's super important. And I love that about your book too. It's because it touches on the culture, but it's not like that's all they are. They're just kids in high school.
Yeah.
With everyone else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why can't we be the new mainstream?
Yeah.
For people, for humans.
Well, how many horror novels or horror movies do you see where the final girl is a person of color? So it's like, you get to do that. Then I want to do that now if I can.
Yeah. Good. Ketty, I don't know how to pronounce it. Sorry. Is sending me more messages for you. Let's see. It's going directly to me, so I'll read it out loud. Okay. She writes, "I'm writing a book about the 1993 Day Hall takeover." I'm not sure what that is. "Most of the folks involved were Latinos, Latinas, and other folks of color supporting us. Wonder how they'll respond to it when pitching, given the conversation on affirmative action and what just happened at Cornell." And then goes on to say, "Given her feedback, wondering if folks are going to have the expectation that that is the subject matter I should write about." Oh, and then interesting, I guess not a terrible problem to have. Yeah, it's hard to say. It's hard to say anymore what expectations are. The business, I think the business is changing really quickly. And it's very fickle too. They kind of, whatever everybody kind of wants this year might not be what everyone's looking for next year.
Yeah. I don't know about that particular event, but if you feel like it does some way speak to something that's going on in the world right now, it doesn't hurt to add that. Like, so you have that query letter, you get to write a paragraph about yourself, 2 paragraphs about the book, and then 1 more paragraph. And sometimes you pitch it as to, "I'm querying this agent because of why." Or you could say, "This is a really timely book given what's happening in the world right now," and tie it into current events to show that it is still relevant, you know, and modern, and something that might appeal to people who are going through that in present day.
Yeah. Yeah, the relevant part. And then can you talk a little bit about comps, what comps are in a query?
So, I mean, they've become really huge, especially after like the Twitter contests. Like, I don't know how much the Twitter pitch contest still happen because Twitter is Twitter now. But back then, that was how you would, yeah, X, that's how you would pitch your book. It would be, so I pitch Hatchet Girls as Lizzie Borden meets Supernatural. Those aren't even books, but it gives somebody a vibe, you know, of what the book is about. So you want to take either two books or a book and a movie, or it could even be a Taylor Swift song. Like, oh, it'll definitely be, if you love All Too Well, this romance will be really like that. You want to give people vibes who don't know anything about your story. So you don't want to pick a book or a movie or a song that's esoteric. You don't want to pick something that they will never have heard of, because it's not going to give them that vibe right off the back. Even if it's a perfect comp, you're like, man, this book is so much like this book, but that no one's ever heard of it. It's from 40 years ago and no one's read it. Like, that's not going to help you. So but then at the same time, you don't want to say your book's like Harry Potter either, because they're going to roll their eyes. So you need to be somewhere in the middle. Don't reach for the stars. Don't go too small, and go for like really giving someone what the vibe of your book is when you're looking for comps. So I think like with Small Town Monsters, they did The Conjuring, which is a movie, meets The Vow, which is an HBO show based on Nexium. So that was 2 TV shows. And that was when Random House pitched it. I think my agent pitched it as The Conjuring meets It, because I use Derry, Maine in It, which is the whole town is affected by evil, was the inspiration for me making the whole town in Small Town Monsters affected by evil. So if you know that, you would sort of get it.
Yeah, so a comp is a comparable, right? Like people,
Yeah.
they want a shorthand, a lot of them. They're overwhelmed and they want to know exactly like what this is like.
I mean, the best I ever saw, there's an author on TikTok whose book just came out. It is her first novel. She got thousands of pre-orders based purely on her TikTok marketing, where she comped it as Warm and Witchy, The Gilmore Girls meets Practical Magic. And she said that in every single video for a year straight, and just repeated that and made all of these videos. And by the end of it, nobody even knew the title of her book. They knew it was Practical Magic meets The Gilmore Girls, and she got thousands of pre-orders. And that's when I started comping Hatchet Girls to Lizzie Borden meets Supernatural and talking about that more than the plot itself, because I think that those comps can work as shorthand on social media if you're marketing yourself there.
Yeah. Have you taken any marketing classes? Would you recommend that authors do that, or aspiring authors do that?
I have not. No, I mean, I do live with a sales guy, but he doesn't help me too much with that. But no, I have not taken any marketing classes. I think I've learned most from lurking on social media and seeing people who do it really, really well, and starting off by trying to emulate what it is that they're doing until you find what works for you. So if you see people who are really killing it on an app, give it a try. Try to do the type of things that they're doing and see what works for you. But no, I've never taken marketing. I probably should. I know a lot of like self-published authors are really good at that. And like that's one of the reasons I haven't self-published, is I feel like you need to know so much about the business of publishing and marketing and advertising and budgets and schedules and all of that. And the authors who are really successful not only write a great book, but they are extremely business savvy and they are very, very good at it. Yeah.
Are there any other questions from anybody? Because I think we might have used all of ours. Are there any on our list that we haven't asked? Kat, you're so quiet, Kat.
I'm fascinated.
I know.
One we haven't asked yet that I do want to ask is, what did it feel like to see your book on the shelf for the first time, and does it still feel the same?
Oh, it definitely still feels the same. So my first book came out in 2008. Like I was like 30 years old. I was a little baby back then. So I remember my first book signing was at the bookstore in my hometown. It was at a Borders, to tell you how long ago that was. And all these teachers came from like my childhood because it was in my hometown. I said it in Ridley, which is where I grew up, and it's a very blue collar town. So there aren't a lot of authors that have gone on, you know, from that school. So I'm there, and like my kindergarten teacher showed up because she saw it in the paper. My fifth grade teacher showed up. So that meant a lot. When I had my book launch party for it, I had it in Philadelphia, and I invited my high school 11th grade English teacher because she kind of stayed in touch with me for a couple of years. And she came with the entire English department from my high school, and my Spanish teacher came. He's still friends. I'm still friends with some of them on social media. That English teacher still comes to any of my signings that are in my hometown. She shows up at all of them. So that has always like meant a lot. But yes, I mean, every single book, when the box comes, like to me, that's the exciting moment, even more than seeing it in the store, is when the box comes to your house and you see it's from your publisher and you open it up and you get to, you know, hold your book for the first time. That is always really exciting. It never gets old.
Yeah.
Right? Do you think that, Elisa?
No, it never gets old. Telling the book. It's like,
Yes.
but just the idea that you can make something up and then it becomes a thing.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. Why do you write?
I would say, like, all of us who are writing, if you are here, you are probably writing for free right now. And so that sort of answers the question. Like, when you're growing up, that's the age-old guidance counselor. Like, if you had $1 million, what would you do? And if you say, I'm going to fix up old cars, well, then go fix up old cars. That should be your job. And all of us who are writing books, you have to write that first book for free. You have to do it in your spare time while holding a job, while taking care of a family, while doing all the other things that are in your life. So if you're willing to do something for free, you must really love it. You know, it's how many jobs out there? No one's going to go be the cashier at CVS for free. You know, so like you're willing to do all of this work for free, then you've got to love it. And so that's what keeps you going. That's what kept me going 7 years of trying to get Proof of Lies published. I was just determined, you know, so you have to love the act of writing, because the publishing industry, you can't control. And all you can control is the words on the page. You can't control your cover, your title, the marketing budget, the print run, the reviews, the interviews you get, whether you're a lead title or a small, you can't control any of that. So once your book comes in the mail, that box, that is the extent of what you have had control over. That's why that's exciting. And I always say, when people ask me, how are sales going? How is everything? I'm like, I'm doing what I can on social media, but there's an entire sales and marketing team. I feel like that should be their job. It is their job now to put a cover on this and to sell this book. Whether this book sells is rarely based on the words on the page, in my opinion. You know, you can have books that are extremely highly reviewed and have a really high star rating that haven't sold that many copies. And that is no fault of the author. The author did their job. So I feel like you have to love the act of writing, because that's what you can control. And the business is going to make it hard for you to keep going. So you've got to love writing enough to deal with the business.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. The actual act of writing. Do you enjoy that? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Very cool. Well, is there anything else you want to tell us about your career, your book, your new other books?
Well, yeah, so Hatchet Girls just came out. It came out October 10th, so it's new. If you want a signed copy, you can order from my local bookstore. It's Children's Book World in Haverford, PA. If you order in the next couple of days, I have an event there on Friday, so I will sign it and they will get it out to you pretty quickly. But even if you order it later, I'll go there and sign it for them. So, you know, you can support my local indie. And Yeah, I've got 2 more books coming out. I'm all over social media. So if you follow me on any of the apps and you want me to follow you back, send me a DM and say, hey, I was in this talk. I will follow you back if you say that. So follow me and I will follow you and we can form a little community.
That's so cool. Thank you.
Very
Yes.
cool. And we are going to post this on the Santa Fe Writers Institute website so that people can watch it later. If you guys enjoy this, found something useful, please share it with all of your friends and fellow writers.
Yeah, and feel free to reach out to me if you have follow-up questions. If you want to get in touch with me, direct message is probably the fastest way through either Twitter or Instagram. The form on my website is not so good. It's got a lot of spam on it. So just like DM me and then you'll get a response a lot faster.
Perfect. I know you're very busy. I know you have a family, and I really appreciate you taking the time. This has
Yes,
been
thank
so
you.
wonderful. You're such a good storyteller. Even just listening to you talk, I could listen to you talk for days. And
Thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you for inviting me here. It's so nice to meet all of you. And Elisa, we need to meet in person someday. I feel like I've known you forever, like literally since my first book came out, and we've never met in person. So one day.
one of these days. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Everybody have
Thank
a
you.
great evening.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Bye.
coming. Bye.